Yeah, I mean, it's just
Hello and welcome to Church of Entropy live streams. Thank you so much for joining for my post-debate with TJump conversation. For those of you new to the channel, what we normally talk about here are things like consciousness, theology, science, and everything in between, including chunking, debate prep strategies, general technology, knowledge and information management strategies, as well as several other domains too numerous to get into. I've got my blog here shared on the screen so people can have a quick overview of what I like to talk about on my blog. I've got a fair bit of things written there, so feel free to use the search button on the left under all the different months to look up particular words that you are interested in. I'm always interested to talk to new people, especially when they have questions about the theories I have put forth. They're a little bit abstract, but definitely worth the commitment to try to understand on a bit of a deeper level because the results are wonderfully satisfying. Be able to look at a cell and understand the underlying mechanism as well as what is happening in the sun, cosmology in general, all the way down to the smallest entities like crystals and atoms, and how they ultimately coalesce, vibrate, and move this universe forward from the present into the future. We've got a basic approach here of how the thought process works. We always start with the fundamental identity known as the primordial sphere. This is a perfect shape, i.e., the locus of points equidistant from a single point in 3 space, aka a sphere. We start with that. We contemplate the sphere for a while and realize that if we went on a journey, the longest journey anyone has ever taken in all history of mankind, we still could never observe one of these magical perfect spheres because we live in the so-called concrete world where everything is a manqué or ghost or cheap knockoff of the ideal or pure form realm, which is where this perfect sphere resides. It is a immanent and transcendent archetype which pervades the entire universe. Anywhere you look, there's a secret sphere hiding, ultimately pushing the development of the system toward that array. Why the sphere, you ask? It's the minimum energy shape maximum entropy shape as well, because those two things are in a way opposites. And it is what minimizes the net torque about the center for an object with mass. The sphere is the maximally symmetric identity in 3 space, and therefore is of fundamental importance in the general evolution of matter. And so things that we can observe in matter, if we can actually trace them right back to a perfect sphere, as would be the case in salt or sugar crystals, or even snowflakes, which have a predictable shape with 6 sides, those would be considered simple forms. Things that we can't make this trace back to are considered complex forms. We know that in some way they derive from the Platonic world, but how do you go from a perfect sphere to a human being is hardly self-evident. But never you mind, that actually ends up not mattering, because the quantum mind is transcendent. Therefore, you're going to get a de facto sphere in the corresponding energetic level, no matter what scale you're looking at things at. So we could still model the mind as a sphere, even though it's not quite looking much like a sphere. And here we have this phylogeny recapitulating ontology notion, which in sort of sheds light onto the idea that there's a primordial form that dictates the evolution of all animals. And it's most evident in the first row here, with a convergence between all these wildly different species of animals. I talked a little bit on the show about the difference in the distribution of energy in the mind between waking and sleeping. And so we actually have that diagram here, and you could use that to help yourself sleep, because you realize that you've got a bunch of energy in your brain, and your brain's working and you're thinking, and so you can't let go of that energy in your brain. But if you just let it go and let it float out to the edge, you'll fall asleep much faster. Sleeping is about letting go more than it is about trying to sleep. Because if you try to sleep, your subconscious, which is responsible for 90+% of your computation faculties, can't distinguish negation. It doesn't know that you're trying to sleep. It just knows that you're trying and most likely failing. So working with the flow of nature is really at the center of this approach. And it can give us a much simpler understanding of the mechanics, still based on a sphere, of extremely complicated forms, all the way up to the human body. And then it gives us a subjectivized understanding, which we can use to improve our own psychology, ultimately adjusting our expectations so that they're realistic, so that we can avoid this much unwanted cognitive dissonance associated with disappointment. So, those of you who are tuned in for the first time, thank you. Really appreciate you joining. And hopefully, we can get up to 1,000 subs on the channel real soon, because that is the next milestone in our journey towards internet greatness. Speaking of internet greatness and huge stars, I am joined today by the one and only Duvid, who does a normal weekly show with me on Sundays to discuss all things going on that week, as well as whatever else may capture our fancy. Duvid is a great conversationalist, knows a lot of things, thinks a whole heck of a lot about philosophy and psychology, and several other things I've never heard of. So we'll hand it over to him to give his thoughts and whatever else might be on his mind today. Thank you so much for joining, Duvid.
Yeah, great job, Jennifer. Really like the debate. People have been following. I did on my channel the last 3 weeks, Thursday night debate prep. Me and Jennifer for over 2 years now have been doing a Sunday week in review, promoting internet debates, talking about consciousness, promoting our own theories, and just the study and promotion of good ideas. And I wanted to be here to help Jennifer do her post show and get 1,000 subs. I think I had a big influence in helping Jennifer stream in the first place, that we bumped into each other on an alternative kind of like open mic stream. My cousin, Babylonian Hebrew, people are familiar. And then I interviewed her because I found her ideas interesting. And I encouraged her to try to become a streaming personality, as that would probably be the best venue for her to advance her ideas. And so and then eventually we combined to just do a Sunday show together because we had enough cross interest in ideas and just kept us both pushing forward and our internet presence. So from a few years of hard work, Jennifer's modern day debate, hopefully a bigger audience and a bigger platform to get out her ideas, explain these things, and we've been working on a lot of these ideas and the mechanism, and obviously we're going to review the debate. I even flowed the debate.
Yeah, I saw that. Thank you for taking the time to do that.
Yeah, I even taught Jennifer the flowing skill in order that she would be able to have a debate. Just some generic thoughts before we go into it, because Jennifer has a lot of ideas, and even a society in a stream and activities, and but we also talk, and then you have circles of like narrowcasting of the type people you speak to regularly versus the wider ideas of the larger world out there of possibilities. So we want to make this show to encourage new people that are interested in some of our ideas to join, and not necessarily narrowcasting the same voices that we usually speak to, although I think we will take guests if anyone does want to come on, and especially if anyone was watching us on, Jennifer on Modern Day Debate, I'm sure she would put the link in the Hangout, and then maybe we would be able to speak to people. I thought Jennifer performed pretty well. I think I'm not going to critique, TJump. He's a professional. They probably make money. They have shows. They have their own platform. But I think, to some extent, I think Jennifer, I'll call it win, because what does it mean to win a debate? But she presented a full platform of pantheism, of her belief system. He did not really present any overview of atheism. So it could just be the debate was like a misnomer. It was basically TJump versus COE, and she was going to present her system, and he was just going to be the negative and try to negate her ideas, which is a debate. But it appeared like it was going to be structured pantheism versus atheism, as opposed to just be like an atheist versus Jennifer. So the debate got derailed right away into just him largely attacking, and I don't think he took her that seriously to just kind of like your quack, like flat earth type thing, that all her ideas about consciousness and mind. Although TJump was knowledgeable, maybe even one of the more knowledgeable people Jennifer has publicly spoken to on these topics about consciousness, mind. Obviously, he's a smart, well-read, well-researched person, and he's the house debater for Modern Day Debates. I'm sure I think he knows the James probably IRL. They probably hung out countless times. They've done hundreds of debates together in programs. So obviously he had the home court bias, home court advantage, but it was relatively pretty friendly, although he kind of took like he was just going to expose you for being a intellectual fraud. Although he's kind of like nice, like it's still nice that there's like women who are intelligent and think about these things, even though you're basically completely wrong and preaching nonsensical things. And I don't think he really proved that and set out. And we could go through the flow in a few minutes. I just want to give the little general thoughts. There's a lot of places where Jennifer could have done better, but it's going to be hard to take control. It's one of her bigger performances, hundreds of people watching. So it's going to be very difficult to try to take control of the stream and the direction of the debate on somebody else's channel, when they have the home court advantage. So she largely just let the flow of it. And you'll see when we do the flow, somehow it turned into this whole thing about how do you differentiate true from false ideas. And then Jennifer had her system of mentorship and self-study and higher levels of realization. And then TJump kind of pulled like a classic logical game where he was like, well, sometimes it doesn't work, and therefore, and because sometimes it doesn't work, it may not work at all. It may not even be probable to work, and therefore it's complete nonsense. And I mean, he was pretty good rhetorically, but I think the argument, largely failed. And then, so he's basically saying like using mentorship and self-studies just the same as pink ponies, because sometimes you could have bad mentors, and even a question maybe Jennifer could have asserted better. What does it mean, good mentorship, or how that comes? But it kind of got largely derailed, because it's like, what did that even have to do with pantheism versus atheism in the first place? And obviously this is because of consciousness, and Jennifer's system as God is the universe has pan consciousness and embedded in it, as opposed to atheistic system where you have to explain consciousness. So it somewhat turned into just a debate on the hard problem of consciousness. Does consciousness arise from the brain or not? Although it may have been unclear to the audience what that had to do with the debate. And TJump, because he had the home court advantage, it was kind of just like established that like science agrees with him, that it's already been completely established that science is on his side, and that was kind of like his home court advantage to press her. And it was actually probably a pretty good productive exchange for Jennifer.
It was really good in the sense that it's a good modeling of how to disagree with somebody without it turning into something ugly.
Yeah, I mean, he was relatively skeptical, saying like that you're kind of just like fraudulent in your claims about science, as opposed to giving any credibility that you actually had interesting theories to advance. And that's fine. That was his debate strategy. Whatever, hopefully a few people in the audience or people will show up that were a little bit more interested in the ideas. And obviously TJump had a pretty good reservoir of knowledge to throw at her and question her. And this concept of life and the photon reduction, the non-trivial. Jennifer's talked about these things. These are complicated. And I mean, likely Jennifer has more credibility in the issue than TJump, although, you kind of just tried to throw it back at her like it's Jennifer who has no credibility in physics. And he obviously had credibility in physics, but likely, he just knows a little bit about the news or latest developments. He did know a reasonable amount, but he didn't establish like any of his own credibility or dismantle Jennifer's credibility. And the whole notion of axioms, because he didn't actually lay out a system. So I mean, Jennifer was trying to go through the establishment of axioms to show that her system, from her opening, that was more reasonable, was a better template to understand the world and live a better life. And he seemed to not really establish axioms, and then just attack you on your axioms. So and even questions where Jennifer didn't really have to press them, whereas like, where do you derive morals from? He's just like his chair, like he was kind of blowing it off. So I think relatively, I would score the debate a win for Jennifer. They had the home court advantage. It wasn't really nicely moderated. TJump didn't really give it a go in terms of presenting the view of atheism. So like, it was just a misnomer if that was actually the debate. So in terms of a friendly but harsh interrogation of Jennifer's ideas, I think she did a relatively good appearance, but that's why I say it wasn't really the debate that it was supposed to be of pantheism versus atheism. It was more like a hostile interrogation with no personal attacks of Jennifer's belief system and ideas.
Yeah, it never got to the point where there was any personal attacks per se, but it never really became conducive to building a basis of shared understanding. Because in theory, I feel like he and I should agree with each other if he's a naturalist, whatever that means. But I guess it's not necessarily true that if you, quote, believe the same things, that you'll have the same conclusions about everything else. So that's why these convos are important. And you can't get them anywhere other than a theological standpoint. So I hope I made my point. I felt like it was kind of a depressing conversation because he didn't agree that the mind is a photon waveform, which I really feel like what's stopping people from just accepting that? It seems so, I don't want to say obvious, but it does seem like a valid explanation.
No, I reject that also. And I would say the mind is immaterial. It's not a photon waveform. It's something in another realm. But that's my own personal system, and I'm not here to propose my system. But him as a materialist, if he's looking at the mind and then he just kind of like, well, everything's a photon waveform. That obviously, if the mind, the brain, using electric signals is, but it may have been, somebody said your own weakness in your presentation of framing the issue. Like, were you presenting pantheism, or were you presenting your own model of mind? And I'd mentioned to you before you went on that if it was a generic debate on pantheism that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with you, that generically anybody who fell into the school of pantheism would have agreed with your arguments, and you verse your, somewhat to say, your own theories, and also like the concept of the universe being God, and you didn't really frame how that comes into your theory of mind and the overall picture of what it means to be a pantheist. What does it mean to believe that the universe is God? To what does that relationship have to do with conscious? And who cares if consciousness is a photon waveform reduction? And is there a difference between a photon waveform reduction and a generic material description of consciousness, where TJump was like, okay, consciousness arises from the physical and it does it through a photon waveform reduction. So what? And so, I think his rhetoric was relatively pretty good. And from a debate thing, like if he just used the term like relevance, which is, probably like a, standardized competitive debate type buzzword, where you're just saying relevance, that he said that constantly. And if we want, we could go over the flow after a little bit more comments, or see if someone else wants to come on to just see, did Jennifer frame her concept in a way that made sense to the audience, or did it just get off track to some sort of tit for tat argument where it didn't make sense to the viewers what this argument had to do with the larger picture? And at least Jennifer gave a full opening to give a framing, and TJump didn't really give a full opening to even frame his ideas. That certainly say that she probably did a better job at that than him. But yeah, I mean, still her performance in that aspect may have been minorly, could have been better, and so it was a little bit difficult to see on the flow, because it's the best way to represent it, to know like what was the overall arc of the conversation. And that's why I said it was more like a hostile interrogation, where I guess he was just trying to poke holes in your system and demonstrate that your system was untenable, and that was sufficient for to say that was his strategy.
Which is why I said that atheism is not really a tenable position, in the sense that it can't really stand on its own. It's more of a rhetorical strategy used to undermine the positions of other people.
Well, he didn't really define atheism, and then I think because he's probably debated atheism on modern day debate so many times, and he's the person that the majority of the viewers are familiar with, that maybe he didn't need to give a whole presentation. But it wasn't, he was just kind of like, atheism is science. Science is in line with atheism, and in order for you to defeat atheism, you have to defeat science. And then he went straight into attacking you, that you never really even had the opportunity to attack his system. And you tried a few times, and You actually need help from the moderator in the beginning, where like he's kind of saying like, oh, you solved the hard problem of conscience, you get a Nobel Prize, and then like he'll help you advance your ideas, and really you don't need his help. And so from that point the debate was basically off track from the initial point, and it just came to a few minor tit for tat on like an epistemology of how do you discern truth from falseness, and then what's the nature of the mind, and then even the question of can you prove the mind, and this question of the sleep example. And we'll see how well Jennifer was able to explain herself in terms of performative factor. Jennifer probably, definitely could have performed much better, but that's the purpose of the prep and the practice in future times, where I had thought that it wasn't, going to even be anything at all relatively about her ideas. It was going to be more a formal debate on atheism versus pantheism, as opposed to, him more pressing her about her own ideas. And it could also be her fault for a systematic understanding of how to separate generic things that she agrees with and the larger school of pantheists would agree with versus her own theories, and then clearly being able to frame that to the audience. And I told Jennifer before that she needs to talk straight to the audience in terms of especially if TJump is coming at her hostile or not taking her ideas seriously. And then it comes into a debate isn't really a good time to explain your ideas. It's very difficult to explain new concepts during a debate, and also a larger audience that may or may not be familiar or friendly. And like I said, if you're the hundreds of people and the majority of them are hostile to your ideas, and then you're trying to just talk to the handful of people that may be interested in those ideas. But no, I think generally your performance was pretty good, and moving forward could have been quite a bit better, and hopefully will be.
Thanks. I'm glad you're engaged and that people are engaged, and that some people didn't think I did as well as I could have. And in terms of that impression, I guess I'm inclined to agree. But there's some mistakes that are just I don't want to make them. Like, I don't want to get grumpy on them. Yeah, sure, I've gotten grumpy on people on this show before, but anyone who watched those exchanges would have been like, well, it was about frickin' time, right? Yeah, this person was acting like a complete bumhead. So I don't want to look like a bitch to sort of pump it up to that level, but I definitely could learn some more rhetorical techniques to appear to claim the upper hand sooner. Like, I felt like I kind of was getting the upper hand by the end of it, but he was definitely the aggressor in terms of the interrogation vibe. And that's why I'm so pro pre-planning the debates just a smidge more, just with like 3 focus questions. You need something to attach the conversation to. Just an introduction and then a free conversation leaves the door open to basically a lose-lose for someone like me, because it's like, I don't want to do what he's doing, and then I don't want it to turn into a bullfight about which of us is going to be able to take the aggressive inquisition angle quicker. That just devolves into pure anarchy. So I didn't, unfortunately, have the opportunity to shine like I would have in other styles of interrogation or debate.
I mean, it's the flowing exercise that I said, like, he's done hundreds of debates. He's probably flowed hundreds of debates. And, Jennifer hasn't even really successfully had a debate that was flowable, let alone to have flowed hundreds of debates to frame and can try to control the flow of the conversation. So if Jennifer was almost completely reactive, that basically everything she was saying was largely in reaction to the direction that TJump took the conversation, and then to speak directly to the audience to say, even though TJump isn't addressing the points or ideas that I made at the beginning, that you would be able to bring those forward to the audience, and saying that's just a skill of debate that Jennifer doesn't have enough debate practice at to maybe even know about, or use, and it's almost a study in audience reaction, and how to do these things is extremely complicated. It's a new skill that doesn't really matter how smart you are. You have to go through the process of flowing debates and analyzing debates and thinking about how argument maps. That TJump, even though he probably put very little to no preparation into this debate, still largely knew how to do it and was able to frame and control the flow of the debate. And then Jennifer, for home estimation, as she speaks to larger audiences, to estimate what the how the I put it in terms of chunking theory, but just say how the audience is understanding the idea. So if she lays out axioms, an estimation of what axioms are more likely to be accepted or not accepted, and then bringing forward your axioms, saying that like if the establishment, the universe is God, it's an optimal method to frame thought, existential angst, various things that may be largely agreeable to the majority of the audience. So a lot of this is just pure debate and rhetorical strategy that Jennifer doesn't really have that much experience in training in, and someone like TJump has exceptional amount of experience in training in, even if he's on the wrong side of a losing argument, still exhibited probably better ability in doing that. And Jennifer hadn't even really heard about flowing even until a few weeks ago, let alone to have flowed hundreds of her own debates to even the same debate where if it had been like pantheism, she had debated hundreds of times and floated hundreds of times to really conceptualize what's the best way to structure that in this concept of how do you speak directly to the audience and bring your ideas forward and build off them, and then even understand how to speak to large audiences where you could say that even if you just agree with me on this point, this axiom, that you could build off that in this way. And for those of you who agree with me on multiple ones of the axioms, and then Jennifer just kind of feel for the crowd or just the experience of doing it to say that yeah, I mean, obviously she's putting forward multiple axioms. It's the purpose of what I have called the multiple truth hypothesis that I've been advancing on Week in Review of Jennifer for over a year now, that would look at comparative axiomatic systems that she would recognize that she advanced a few axioms. TJump attacked some of those axioms and left other of the axioms unchecked, and how to bring those forward. And she did that a little bit with the concept of providing a better life, and I think TJump said, like, giving the rope to hang himself, that she didn't press him on how he derives his morality and ethics, and allowed that from the super champ, and basically by him saying, like, from his chair, is that to be interpreted that he has no morals and ethics, or such a thing as a nihilism. But even if it's JF who could philosophically justify nihilism, as opposed to not even taking the question seriously. So I think in many ways, Jennifer definitely held her own, but against like a debate professional, TJump is just too skilled to for Jennifer's right now training level at debate.
Well, I guess it depends if people think he won. I didn't really read the chat that much to know. I don't know if anyone was paying attention to the chat and had an impression of what people thought. And somebody, I think it's Right Reaction, saying that they're a largely anti-theist audience. And there's somebody complaining that their comments are getting moderated. I can't control that. It's a YouTube thing. Okay. Looks like most of your comments are coming through, so please don't take the YouTube thing personally. Moving on. Yeah, so if you're curious about the multi-axiomatic worldview, you've come to the right place, because that's what we talk about all the time here. And I have some very developed axiomatic systems that go into occasionally around these here parts. But what do you think, David? Do you want to screen share your flow, or do you want to wait till a Thursday night special show for debate prep? And we can send the link to the show in the chat. It's up to you.
Now we might as well do it now, I guess, because get the post show and it's fresh in my mind, and I probably won't even be able to read my own handwriting if I don't do it now. Maybe if you want to flow it at a later time, maybe we could do another Thursday night debate prep, tonight and I mean Thursday, and go over your flow. But so yeah, this was my flow up to the point where it cut off. I took a picture and sent Jennifer as it cut off. She probably didn't see it till after. And then this was my flow up to the question and answer point. And so I have TJump in green and Church of Entropy in pink. And then, so I have it labeled here. You see one, which is Jennifer's opening, and then 2, which was supposed to be TJump's opening, but he didn't really do an opening because he didn't present an axiomatic system or like a representation of atheism. He kind of just attacked pantheism. So it was basically like pantheism versus the negative, not really pantheism versus atheism. And from there, it became, just questions. The first one largely on this question, the universe, does it have a mind or not? And then the third one that I labeled like what is divine, and where it was largely Jennifer questioning. The fourth one was, I guess, supposed to be Jennifer questioning TJump, but I guess, just from his maybe seniority of debate or personal ego, largely became him questioning her. So it was supposed to be Jennifer questioning TJump about what are his axioms of atheism, but instead it largely became him questioning her about how do you tell true ideas from false ideas, and that eventually linked her saying through mentorship, and that went for quite a while, and it wasn't even clear like what that had to do with the topic at all, besides like the typical need to establish axioms. And then like at 5, at some point this like can you establish mentorship, and because he said like sometimes you have bad mentors, therefore having a mentor can't be scientific since like pink ponies. He goes into like a recap, so I restarted it, and kind of wanted to claim the mantle of science, where he's speaking on behalf of science and you're speaking on behalf of nonsense. And that eventually comes to like, do you have, him saying, do you have proof of anything? And so Jennifer's trying to explain some of her ideas on consciousness, and some of them being more complicated. And then a little interesting conversation of the proof of her theory of the center of the energetic center of consciousness going outside of the head during sleep. So that's the the one part, Jennifer's introduction. 2 is TJump not using his introduction, but using it to directly question like what the hell is this woman talking about, and then a little bit him questioning like what does it mean to be divine, to Jennifer's attempt to take control and ask TJump about axioms, but somehow TJump reversed that into him questioning her about how she knows what's true from false, to the recap where TJumps will like took the mantle of science and then claims that everything she's saying has nothing to do with science, and to her actually trying to advance some of her ideas to show that she is trying to represent somewhat a solution to the hard problem of consciousness within a pantheistic framework of the universe being God, and then understanding some of these ideas through the quantum mind. And it seemed like he rejected Hamarov in a lot of various things kind of offhand, if you want, we could go in detail through the tit for tat of these arguments.
Sure. I was frankly quite surprised that it managed to be so horizontal.
Yeah, I'm saying TJump's a professional debater, and like I said, it was largely horizontal conversation because it stayed on a point where almost every point was directly related to the previous point. And in fact, he was maybe even better at that than you, because he's a professional debater. That's what he does. So you just read, my outline of Jennifer's speech. The universe is God, is the system of pantheism, and it's the optimal method to frame thought, avoid existential angst. Civilization needs God. Suppress, and she talked like the history of the suppression of pantheism, and then mentioned the concept of the monad and the origins of proof. Says that pantheism makes a better system for predictions and patterns. Contrast detectors, the supreme ideal, the 3D periodic table, accepting the theocratic nature of the world, and how to answer questions, and the issue of identity and the creation of our own self-identity, that the pantheistic system is more conducive to all of these, to where TJump was basically like, what the hell is this woman talking about? I didn't understand anything you said. Which, if that was his strategy, well, that was his strategy. So I'm saying, like, okay, he could have done some research. He could have read your blog, a few videos. He could have looked into pantheism and said like, well, that's not my understanding of pantheism. But instead, he chose to just be like, what the hell is this crazy woman talking about? Basically, which God forbid. But he basically is, God is mind, and the universe has no mind. Therefore, God can't be mind. There was the tautology that he basically gave that said like, this is such a ridiculous argument because the universe can't be God because the universe has no mind. And he said Jennifer didn't even put forth an argument, and that people benefit from religion has nothing to do with truth. And then he said basically she was just saying naturalism, and that was so he just kind of directly questioned. And so I thought Jennifer had been relatively clear, so the fact that TJump didn't really understand anything that she said. And so if you see past the two, this is like the flow, the back and forth of the question of, does the universe have a mind? Jennifer said the periodic table itself is like the mind of the universe. And I can't even read my own handwriting, but something about complexity. And then TJump asked about like, well, calculators have mind. And then Jennifer said there has to be observation in a waveform reduction, that implies mind. And TJump was as well, all electrical signals, if that implies mind, doesn't all electrical signals imply mind? Jennifer mentioned kind of Hamarov and the universe as proto-consciousness, where TJump, just like Hamarov's wrong. There's no evidence of that. Jennifer talked about the established of experience, and talked about qualia, and a little back and forth to Jennifer saying that TJump doesn't know the nature of his own experience, that the experience, as said from like a dualistic system, or from however Jennifer is explaining it, that the experience of the mind doesn't rise from the actual brain. And TJump doesn't actually understand the nature of his own consciousness. And it's TJump who claims to have the solution to the hard problem of consciousness, though Jennifer is claiming to have the hard problem of consciousness, where Jennifer, I guess, at least tried to reverse it on him to say like, well, how come you get a pass on answering the hard problem of consciousness, even though her system, she's saying, is more conducive to answering the hard problem of consciousness, or even saying it has answers to the hard problem of consciousness to push back on TJump. Like, why should he get a pass on answering the hard problem of consciousness? And we'll see this again in 4, this question of science is filtered through the mind, and if TJump doesn't have an explanation for the hard problem of consciousness. But I'm not sure, Jennifer wasn't really able to take control of the conversation. So then TJump kind of just jumped back, and this here at 3 to, call like what is divine. And Jennifer gave, like eternal, pleasing, or various attributes that could be associated with divine, and that's that consciousness is divine. So TJump's the mind is from the brain. And then this question about emotions, where Jennifer said the mind, part of the mind, and the role of emotions, and the role of emotions in guiding us towards divinity. And then TJump argued a little bit about, where's the evidence, and kind of like, emotion or the crowd. I think Jennifer gave the example of like the modern art and the feces. But the question, what's the difference between proof, emotion, and going with the crowd? So Jennifer gives knowledge through consciousness, including emotion, that there's a larger consciousness that includes thought and emotions. And then a little back and forth, like, what about false emotions? And Jennifer acknowledged the existence of false emotions, or the assumption of intent to harm being the most likely recognition of false emotions, where people generally, when they're harmed, assume the other person intended to harm them, which is in fact rarely the case. And then I guess from my reading, I put number 4 here, was Jennifer tried to reclaim control of the conversation by pressing TJump about his axioms and his starting point, and how he explained consciousness and his causal axiom, and arguing, what are your axioms? And TJump, I don't know if he was playing dumb, or saying like what are axioms was causality, or he just thought you were dumb and talking down to you in a condescending way, or a certain way, which to some extent is, like I would say Jennifer's bad karma, because like she's always trying to teach. And so here was TJump, he's just like, I'm obviously smarter than you, so I will be the one teaching you, which is maybe a mirror somewhat of the something I point out in Jennifer often. But this kind of like when she mentioned something, and then TJump was like, I'm obviously the expert on this, not you, so I will explain it. But this idea, what are axioms, what is causality, to where TJump didn't really define himself. He just tried to take the mantle of science. Like, obviously he is speaking for the authentic version of science, and decide to press Jennifer. So how do you determine truth from from falsehood? And so it gets into quite a little tit for tat on even what are axioms, what is causality, can you derive method from axioms, to Jennifer talking about her system of calibrating consciousness, stages of realization, universalism, which was consistent with her understanding as the universe as God, or maybe some larger panpsychic concept of consciousness being the ability to tap into this universe through an introspective way, because consciousness does not arise from the brain, but consciousness is in fact being part of something larger than us. But he largely just completely rejected that, and point out you can't have a universal and a particular. And Jennifer tried to give an example of a spectrum, where you could have every personality is a unique point along the spectrum, even though it's part of a spectrum. For how you could have universal and particular, but he didn't seem to understand that. So going around the corner here, TJump's like, well, give me a predictive test. How can you know true from falsehood? And so Jennifer here said, find a role model, self-study, aim for higher level of function. And so, what's the relevance causal chain between a role model and determining truth from falseness? So, Jennifer, that's your starting point. It's the basis of beliefs. Quite a bit of back and forth. TJump's like, what if you have a bad role model? How does a role model have anything to do with truth? And so Jennifer's, to me, like with leanings into Hinduism and meditation, just made a lot of sense to me. But you're saying you need axioms, you need a starting point, so you have to have a mentor, and you should do the best as you can. Just choose as good of a mentor and use the evidence. TJump's, what about Trump? Trump is popular and has success and wealth, so why not make him a mentor? Jennifer's, like bad karma. You could have a successful mentor, but if they have bad karma, you'll see the negative effects. And then TJump basically diverted to say, like, well, because you could have bad mentors, therefore saying that this mentorship model for discernment of truth was like as silly as pink ponies. And then TJump kind of reclaimed the conversation to recap all of his points, where he was like, this woman Jennifer is so off. Like, how do you know truth? She gives this completely ridiculous false idea that you could determine truth from taking a mentor, which just doesn't work at all. Obviously, taking a mentor just completely fails, as opposed to science, which he supposedly represents, works. But that was, kind of like his recap and take on it. And, so Jennifer, trying to, being a hostile, somewhat environment they weren't necessarily being mean, but he wasn't really taking her that seriously, or her ideas that seriously, without, he didn't personally attack her, but he was obviously pandering to the audience that, like, this woman doesn't know what she's talking about. It's not based on science, and he's some sort of expert on science. So Jennifer tries to get back into the epistemology. How do you know science to tell you the truth? And TJump's just like, trust science. Science is right. And he's like this beacon of knowledge on science. Although he knew a lot of random information, he didn't really lay out or establish himself in that way. But that it was his strategy. So Jennifer talked about the explanatory gap in predictions, and TJump was meant, like, I guess, systematic science improves life. They didn't establish how he's speaking on behalf of established science. And then Jennifer argues about, so what about improving life or technology? That there's more to consciousness and life than better technology, and just better technology doesn't intrinsically correlate with what you're going to define as good. To more TJump, like, so what's your method? What can you actually prove? To Jennifer saying, well, you have to accept her axioms of the mind as a quantum computer, and then and then also reincarnation. And I guess he didn't at that point address the mind as a quantum computer, went to reincarnation. But Jennifer was kind of talked about her idea of mind energy conservation, and how that works into reincarnation, the centralized consciousness. I mean, so Jennifer tried to press TJump on how is consciousness centralized if it comes from the physical. And it's like, I guess TJump was kind of like, he represents science, and science has already solved the hard problem of consciousness, and he doesn't need to answer any of these questions of hers. He'll be doing the questioning. And so Jennifer did make some points on, I mean, he did make some points on his kind of like question of nature nurture, the origin of mind, where Jennifer questioned him on the origin of personality according to a physicalist system, which he had some sort of explanation. I guess his fans or his people could say how clear his was, and I had to turn the paper sideways to keep it going, which came to Jennifer's point on, can you prove anything in any way to her question of sleep, that the geodesic center, energy center of the mind, moves out of the brain during sleep. And Jennifer has a blog article. She could talk about that more. But I think her. You read her blog that possibly her explanation didn't come out as clearly as it should have, and he was maybe trying to make fun or belittle her idea. But her basic central tenet is saying that the mind is usually centered inside the head where the brain is, but when we sleep, that center moves outside, and because it's a electromagnetic phenomenon, that could be measured, that the center has moved out of the mind, although it became unclear. To even me and the audience, how exactly that would be measured. The idea was sensical to me, but I think TJump largely argued that it was nonsensical, and I'm not sure Jennifer was able to explain herself well enough. But I know she has a blog article on that and her idea. But it was an actually pretty interesting point of the debate, and then it largely came to a close. So it wasn't even it was flowable, and there was a horizontal conversation, which means that most of the points were directly off the other point, and you could see there was long chains of 10, 15, even 30 minutes of tit for tat on single points. But it really wasn't a well-structured debate where she put forward a system and he point by point went over her points, and he didn't even put forward a system. And then there wasn't really closing. I gave him here kind of his recap where he summed up his kind of like straw man of why this mentorship model was completely ridiculous. And but there wasn't really closing statements that much, or Jennifer didn't really have a chance to sum up. So in that way, it could have been much better. It was pretty loosely moderated, where it's kind of just like, I don't know if you call it like Lincoln Douglas, or you and two going at it each other, largely without help of the moderator. And then the questions, the super chats, were somewhat interesting, but were more generic questions that didn't really delve too much deeper into the general flow of the debate, which was somewhat nonsensical. That there was a lot of good argumentation back and forth, but it wasn't really a well-framed, structured debate. And as I think you could just see from the flow that was more TJump's fault than Jennifer, because Jennifer gave a full introduction with multiple points, as where TJump didn't really give a comprehensive overview of his system. And then when Jennifer tried to press TJump to what are the axioms of his atheism, he even flipped it on her to demanding that she explain to him how you determine true from false ideas, even though that wasn't the debate. And you see, that was the 4 here, that's the longest give and take, and TJump is like, back to the point of how you determine true from false ideas. And it was saying like, that wasn't the point of the debate. The point that Jennifer there was supposed to be questioning atheism and trying to say what are the axioms of atheism. The tit for tat was relatively interesting, but I think you see the overall flow here that I think Jennifer did a good job. It's questionable, like, how do you score this? And it wasn't really meant as a scoreable debate. So in terms, it wasn't really an atheism versus pantheism debate. It was more like a hostile but non-personal attack on Jennifer's system.
Cool. Thank you so much for that wonderful summary. Appreciate it. And the points too. So yeah, like I definitely
you should flow your own debate.
I'm sympathetic to what you're saying. Can you understand that I was concerned about coming across as a bitch, and I really didn't want that?
Well, I'm saying that that's separate, like the character refinement, to say, okay, if
because you were saying like, oh, there was some stuff I didn't do that I could have done to come across as more the champion of the debate, and I was thinking like, I did It did cross my mind. I was just worried it would go into the being perceived as a bitch mode or a vibe, and I really didn't want that because I
Yeah, I
think
mean,
that'll make people
there might have been nothing
not
you
want
could
to
have
talk to
done.
me.
I mean, very well that,
Perhaps
saying
not.
like if you, I mean, because it was, they had the home court advantage in TJump what was his name again? Josh or
You're talking
or
about the channel owner, James?
James are friends and, working with each other a long time. So you probably couldn't really, there's nothing you could have done to take control of the conversation, although you could have more, like to try to frame it and bring it back to the larger point. Like even in the hostile environment and yeah, anything, if you tried to take control, it probably would have backfired. And, so maybe you did the best with the situation.
Thanks. Well, there's always a room for improvement, and the big fans are always the harshest critics because they have the highest expectations. It's like, guys, the whole point of the system is to stop having unrealistic expectations. You can't expect it to be like it is when I take on the quote bad guys, people who are saying just awful things, and then I just totally clank them. But that's not what this was. James is a professional. Same with TJump. And I don't want any bad blood between us because, I mean, what's my ultimate goal? People to be cool with my ideas, hopefully get benefit out of them. That's not going to happen if they decide I'm a bitch. I'm not saying your positions are wrong or anything. I'm just saying that I have thought about this and it plagues me because I don't like coming out the lesser, looking like I got sort of, lost face.
Well, I'm saying you separate your ego from the debate and saying like it's not about, that's why I said it's not about you, it's about the topic. And if it's a question of, like a disrespect to you or just a question about the legitimacy of the conversation, it's like, let's do our job, let's fulfill our dharma, and we're here to have a proper debate. And the way this is going, it's getting off topic and or whatever the case the case is very difficult to do. And then even saying that, how to frame what you're talking about to the audience, or saying that it's very important to establish the root of consciousness for the larger dichotomy that even, did anyone make it clear that atheism goes more in line with the materialistic explanation of consciousness, and that's why this understanding of consciousness is so important. And into this kind of debate of how do you establish true from false ideas had almost nothing to do, because it's possible that your explanation or his explanation for how to establish true for false ideas could be equally applicable to an atheistic or a pantheistic system. So it was just like an argument for the sake of argument, and that you played into that, maybe to take control of the conversation, but it's very difficult to to assess what, to analyze like a chess game or something, because there's a winner and loser. You could look, computer analysis and say, oh, I made a bad move here. And so when
to be honest,
Jennifer
it reminded me of the bajillion conversations I've had with atheists to this point. Like every single thing he's said, I've heard before. I just never heard them delivered in such rapid fire succession, which is why I kept coming back to this idea like you're not being skeptical enough about skepticism itself, and you're allowing your beliefs to be dictated by the authority of science that you can't scratch past that surface.
Yeah, and I think he also speaks very quickly. And I mean, Jennifer will have to go through the flowing exercise herself. In the flowing exercise, that she will be the biggest beneficiary of her own flowing, and for her own understanding of how she thought the conversation went, and then for future moving forward to understand that flow or the direction of that conversation, to have more productive, better conversations, not just in terms like winning a debate, but in explaining ideas and building up her system, somewhat axiomatically in the way of addressing people who might have easier or more difficult times with various axioms. So, with Tom pressing her on multiple parts of her axioms, that will force her to, kind of hit the books, go back to thinking about how she presents those specific ideas, and then also the larger general framework of the larger idea, the larger picture, and how that, framing those or those various axioms fits into the larger frame. And, so Tom didn't do any better than Jennifer at that. So I was saying you could look at debate objectively, like a chess game or something. Maybe you win, even though you didn't play the best moves, or that the other person actually had better defenses or even winning chances and just didn't see it. And that you could look back at a game and say, I won, but my opponent actually objectively could have beat me, and just wasn't able to find it. As opposed to, so for the debate, to saying, what if Tom objectively had given the very best arguments and framing, as just subjectively, like who won the debate versus objectively, Jennifer's opponent, if she was up against, so to say, objectively the very best arguments that atheism could put forward. And, and so I think Tom is more skilled in the actual debate, and it probably has a lot of knowledge to then actually being a well thought out systematic atheist. That even to Ben Watkins is a more well thought out systematic thinker in terms of physicalism. And if you, I don't think Watkins is an atheism, but saying that TJump is more indicative of a very good debater than necessarily a systematically well thought out atheist. And even JF probably argues philosophically or the atheist school better than TJump. TJump is just a more skilled debater.
I would say he's better at rhetoric. Excuse me. To be really good at debate, it has to be structured in some way. So there wasn't enough structure to see who's the better debater there. But he definitely beat me at rhetoric.
He didn't show that he even prepared at all, looked at your blog or like watched any of your stuff.
Yeah, so like at the beginning of the talk before we went live, he's like, I don't even know what this conversation is about. So he's confident enough in his beliefs that he felt that any theological opinion was going to be easily defeated. But in the process, what he did was show how weak the position of materialistic science really is. It's like, oh, it's genetics and randomness and evolution, and that's, ta-da, you get consciousness. It's like, maybe that's not going to be satisfactory for everyone. Maybe they don't have the same memory faculties to swallow that much crap that it actually sticks with them. So going to eventually need to contend with the fact that they basically have no, or at best, partial answers for consciousness from that perspective of materialistic reductionism.
Yeah, so it kind of like the debate champ that becomes the e-celeb and then forgets he's supposed to debate. So he's just there like, oh, I'm the e-celeb.
Oh my God, that's a funny archetype we've not seen yet. Oh God. Go ahead, that's classic.
I mean, it's pretty common. Even everyone falls into it, like maybe like Destiny or JF, any of these big names, where it's saying like, no, I mean, debate is a procedural thing that you need to prepare and take professionally, and you're not really a star like a chess player. So you could be a chess champ, and so it never really makes you a star or celebrity in that way. You're still just a chess player. So like you're still just a debater, and no matter how good you are at it, you should follow best practices and protocol. That means like preparing for your opponent, or at least taking their ideas seriously, as opposed to, if he's putting himself out there like a flat earth, like, he's just somebody that's excellent at detecting deception and exposing frauds, that's not debate. And saying that means he didn't enter the debate in good faith if his goal was just to expose you as a fraud, and whatever his interpretation of his own value system, like that's what he does. Then then it was James poorly framing what was going to happen. Just like TJump exposes Church of Entropy as opposed to pantheism versus atheism debate, and it's probably the nature of their for-profit like system. People, you did well, they need new guests, so they put you on again, and they were really more interested in their little network or super chats, that they didn't really research your ideas or take it seriously, and then just came to the performance, and he just did his generic pill pull basically. And but you had your chance because he's a tough interrogator, and it was probably a positive experience for Jennifer to publicly have her ideas interrogated by a leading skeptic, and also that they were relatively cordial and professional, and it wasn't any personal attacks, and it was just like, no, I think your ideas are completely false and non-scientific, but he didn't think you were a bad person, and probably thought like, no, it's a good thing that you're thinking about these things and entering the arena, but like, no, he's not going to give any credibility that your ideas are sensical.
That might undermine his position a bit. Ralph, are you here to have a conversation?
Yeah, I just thought I jumped in. A couple of people we know in common might have said, oh, you should speak to Church of Entropy, Jennifer. So I watched the debate. And yeah, it was quite interesting. So
I'm going to take a few minute break. I'll be back.
Hey, nice to meet you, David. Yeah, Jen, I thought you did quite well, actually. I think you took him out of his comfort zone enough times, right? Where he started acting a little childish, to be honest. References to purple and what have you. So, but I'm very intrigued about your worldview and stuff.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, my background, I'm a computer scientist, and you're all going to scream right now. I'm also a Christian, but so I'm a theist, if you like. But I'm very interested in things like physics and obviously quantum mechanics. I'm interested in alternative ontologies, right? And we know things like I'm half Indian, half English, and we know from like Vedic studies and Dharmic studies that there's lots of stuff we don't have explanations from in classical Western science that seem to have been discovered, for lack of a better word, by Eastern points of view, right? I'm not sure what your background is, but it sounds like you're cognitive, conscious at least, of Eastern approaches, right? Am I right?
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah, so that's the kind of stuff that you got a little, when you mentioned the brainwave states, for example.
Just imagine a Swami, if you can imagine a Swami who loved his religion so much, loved yoga so much, that he took birth as a European woman to prove the greatness of his yogic skills.
Yeah, indeed. But it's interesting, isn't it? Even I'm not a physicist by trade, but things like unified field theory and stuff show, am I right? They show remarkable alignments with things like Vedic states, right? You literally have field theory lining up perfectly with things like yogi understanding. So,
well, I'm of the opinion that the ancient Vedics basically axiomatized quantum mind, which is what the idea of like a centralized consciousness and there being intrinsic awareness, at least, to matter and how the whole cycle works. So I can't prove that because I'd have to like get initiated back to Veda and then get the interpretations right. And I'm sort of the opinion that a lot of this stuff doesn't quite translate. So I think rightly interpreted, yeah, we're going to find convergence between all the things that are true, and Vedas will be shown.
Also as well, because my approach is, as everyone has their own particular bent, because it's whatever your background is, and as a theoretical computer scientist, I believe the same problem occurs deep in computer science. I mean, theoretical computer science, right? We know Turing machines cannot compute; they can't make copies of themselves, for example. So it looks like we've got this kind of entanglement, to use that expression, between the consciousness and the thing being perceived by the consciousness. This idea that you can atomize these things and make them orthogonal, and say, oh, here I have this consciousness, and here I have a description of it, and this description is detached from the thing doing the describing. Seems the more we, I'm not sure if you're familiar with works of people like David Deutsch and stuff, but if you look at that, the more we look at it, the deeper it seems like the entanglement is present, right? It seems like you can't separate the seer from the seen. But this is poison to atheists, right? Or people who are believers in the scientific method. So,
Well, I think basically what happened was that the religion was false, so they went looking for truth somewhere else, and then because they didn't have the right framework of a religious background to understand the ideas, they fell back into the same problems you'd see associated. So, like, a false religion has the same basic profile as atheism.
Yeah,
It's
I think part of it is that it's a fear.
I just want to see who this next person is. Sorry, is there somebody who's just joined, and when you're unmuted, there's background noise, so I've had to mute you twice. So I don't know who you are, but did you want to introduce yourself? Tom, you?
Yeah, I'm Tom, and I'm known as Effluent for you on the
Okay.
this pocket. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe just mute when you're not talking, because there's a bit of background noise on your thanks. Yeah, it just makes the stream a bit better if everyone mutes when they're not talking. But yeah, I'm really glad you like my conversation, Ralph, because I think we have to have more combos like this because it's super interesting stuff, and I just think we need religion. I don't see any other way around it.
I think
and the atheists sort of prove it. Sorry, go ahead.
Isn't it interesting? They spend all their time. Isn't it ironic that they spend all their time speaking about God or the absence of God, right, or theism? If that's not itself proof of the pudding, I'm not sure what is, right? But no, but I think this Eastern stuff's also very interesting, as well as I think advances in understanding of maths and physics. Right? We know that we can't compute things. I mean, again, I go back to computer science. We know that a mathematician friend of mine once said, ultimately mathematics is consciousness beyond comprehension, right? At certain levels of abstraction and pure maths, you just are losing yourself, right? So we know that there's something entangling our ability to understand the thing we understand. And I don't think Western theoretical, just normal theories of epistemology and science have any answers. They only have science of the gaps, right? That's all they have, right? Is, hey, this, and you did very well against Tom when you said, well, what about, I guess you were alluding to Kuhnism, right? What happens if you throw out like Newtonian physics, quantum mechanics? You guys don't seem to care that you're consistently wrong, right? Or right for a period of time, and then your ontology is vanished, right? Then you have to make up another one, and then there's another one, and now we have field theory, now we have string theory, and now, but at each point in time, they never seem to get us closer, if that makes any sense. So they just seem to be your current ontology du jour, right? If you like. So I'm not sure if
those are very good points, Ralph. I think that's part of the problem that I have with Jennifer and David is just like it's just toss the ball up in the air and look at the ball, but you don't see where you're looking from.
Yeah, I think so. I think, and I was, I haven't watched the debates for a while. I was thinking of debating Tom at some point, but like I said, people said, "Oh, Jennifer's debating Tom. Have a look." And I thought the conversation was very interesting. I thought Tom was trying to win the game, and Jennifer was trying to play the game. And after buying that those kind of games in game theory always unravel after a while, right? Because you can't go one guy just going for the W, and the other person, Jennifer, tried to make it a kind of game of an exchange, and then it kind of devolved a bit, right? A bit of name calling and what have you. But maybe there'll be a round two. So. And this time, maybe you have to unleash your inner bitch or whatever you call it in North America.
Well, the thing is, like, I've done it before because I'll talk to anyone. Like that debate there, even though I'm saying it wasn't quite a debate because it didn't have enough questions in it, it was still like more professional than probably 90% of the conversations that I have. So I have been catty towards people. Like, I don't like doing it, but to me, it's like in a situation like that, it's not worth looking bad for that couple little extra points, because then it's like I don't want to look like the person who like can't play it. Yeah, like you said, play the game. It's like better to be a team player than I want to win and get the glory every time. Even though it was a debate, it was like he wasn't bringing a counter thesis. There was nothing for me to attack because it's not a belief, it's a lack of a belief. And this sort of just proves my point that asserting a negative is not a tenable axiom, no matter what that negative is.
Indeed, and it's super early in Berlin, so I'm sorry about my voice might be a bit gruffy, but when you said, you're not skeptical about your skepticism, I did choke on my coffee. I went, oh, that's a good one-liner, right? But in the end, do you want to win with one-liners, or do you want to have an honest, kind of open conversation? I think Tom wanted to win that debate, and that came across, because I've seen him, you did take him out of his comfort zone, though, which is quite unusual for him, right? So I think, you've obviously tickled his feathers or something. But I'll be on mute for just 2 seconds, so I need to just deal with
Sure, no
something.
problem. I can chat with Tom. So you said you disagreed with something, Tom, there, and you wanted to talk about it?
Well, I don't think I'm the Tom that you guys are referring to. This is
No,
my first time.
we were talking about Tom TJump, but now I was pointing it to you,
Yeah.
Tom, because everyone else is gone and you just joined, and you said we were looking at the sphere, but we weren't going far enough in looking at the sphere. The point of the sphere is that it's a calibration. Do you know what calibration means?
Yes, I do.
So you can calibrate machines, and you can also calibrate your mind, and this is a time-tested way of doing it. So it's the fact of trying.
That doesn't address the point that I made, in which simply put, the baseline in which you approach the subject matter is not cohesive. If all we talk about is the ball in the air, let's say, but we don't have a common baseline, and
that's why we always talk about axioms.
The ball in the air has no value.
That's why we talk about axioms.
Okay.
Communication isn't really possible if you don't share axioms.
Yes.
And we have no way of knowing, at this point, we have no way of knowing if we share axioms.
Exactly. And I think that's kind of the game that you and David play, is that you throw the ball up in the air and there are no axioms. And then you dance around the axioms. It's like
I have axioms.
A dance floor.
I have axioms.
Go around the axioms.
I have axioms.
Is never
it's you
really
that doesn't have axioms.
Oh, no, I have axioms.
Well, that's great. So you should write about them and prove why they prove the theory.
For everyone to have is axioms. Everyone needs to have axioms, but when you ignore them and make them seem inconsequential to your argument, you don't have an argument. And that's what I see you do, everyone, quite often.
All right. Kai-Fei says, I should have called out TJump in identifying with naturalistic pantheism. He already agrees with your position, apparently. See, that's the whole thing. It's like, it's one thing to...
It's a no-brainer. It really is a no-brainer for your audience. Anyone who...
You got to just let me finish here. It's one thing to say something, to pay lip service to a belief, to virtue signal. It's another thing to actually know what a belief entails and implies and predicts. So it's just a matter of how far you want to take it, right? It's like pantheism, fine. Agree with cause and effect, fine. But what does that really mean? How far are you willing to interpret the stuff you have access to? And based on what presumptions are you interpreting things as being consequent to the fundamental axioms, i.e., what form does causality take? And my theories are all just simply a consequence of the axiom of causality. It's other people who don't know what the hell they're thinking, because emotions are all tied into the reasoning process. Like, Tom, you sound upset. I don't know if you've been drinking or what, but you sound a little upset. I muted you, Tom, but you can unmute. Yeah, there you go.
Okay. All right. You're, okay. I'm going to back up and say, let's talk about, Jen, if you want someone to understand your perspective on how consciousness works, how information is conveyed and downloaded or brought into reality, then you have to approach people from where they're at. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think you have a point with that, which is why I took the time to learn all the Western science. Now, not everyone in the West understands science, do they? So now I got to dumb it down again, but it's like at some point, maybe somebody else could do a bit of that for me. And maybe I can just focus on the people who are already at a point where they understand the science well enough to understand what it actually implies when correctly interpreted. That's my hope. But I'm also willing to talk to people who don't have any familiarity with science, but I don't like the conversations to be repetitive. I like them to be productive, and when it's just somebody nagging me, it's kind of like not so productive. Because
Well,
it's like basically trying to presume some type of a judgment high ground or a moral high ground. It's like, I didn't really ask for criticism and it's unwelcome. The only thing I care about is accuracy.
Mhm.
And you're not going to beat me on accuracy. I already have all my stuff laid out. It's all ready to go. You've got nothing. You've got some.
It was interesting, isn't it? You used
I think that's where you're limiting your audience.
And again, I don't care what you think about
people.
this stuff. Go ahead, Ralph.
I was just going to say it was interesting. You used the expression. It's one of the fields of discipline that's I've been following for the last 20 years quite closely. Is complex adaptive systems, and used an expression from it, right? Punctuated equilibria. And you notice he immediately flew past that one as well. He didn't realize that in of itself, we've spent, 1,000 years in science on reductionism. And we've only got about 20 or 30 years now of synthetic holism behind us. So we know enough from science that we cannot make like Newtonian linear predictions on complex adaptive systems. We can't do it for the stock market, for weather. So we know these ontologies at their deepest level are lacking and wanting, right? But when you hit that little point and use that beautiful expression from Cass, he again flew past that, which says to me that he didn't want to learn or didn't want to listen. I think he wanted to judge, and he really wanted to admonish you, right? I think he wanted to scold you, which is quite a fascinating human approach to a conversation, right? Let me tell Jennifer off, right? Let's see how that goes down, right? But that's just my
presuming the moral high ground is a very lazy, effeminate technique for people who don't really know much. And it's just a way of like getting someone on the defensive through a line of increasingly aggressive questioning. And he didn't accelerate that process. Like, I think he ultimately converged towards that process. He didn't accelerate it fast enough for me to catch on to it. So I was largely taking the bait, so to speak, and answering his questions in good faith, because those are actually good questions when you're interrogating a guru. So those questions hardly ever get asked to me. And even though he's going to paint me like crap, it's worth just putting the answers out there, because so few people have access to what it is that I was saying. And I think it's so important. Duvid, this is Ralph. He's an Indian Englishman who had a good time at the debate and thought he'd join and tell us his thoughts. So I was really happy to meet him. And there's also Tom, who seems a little disheveled, doesn't really like us, but can't quite say why.
Yeah, I just thought I just taking some my Michigan meds, and like the meditative technique and the explanation of consciousness that spiritual non-materialistic explanations give. So if you could have expressed to the audience and maybe demonstrated like a public psychoanalysis where you're turning the debate.
That would have gone into bitch territory, but please continue.
Well, I mean, you didn't have to turn it that Tom, assuming that mind arises from the brain, he might be able to conceptualize that, or even have done meditative technique that clearly works in terms of observing your own mind. But someone who does the meditative technique of observing your own mind fits better with non-physical explanations for mind. And I think that large tit for tat about part of the debate was because about emotions, and was this question: what is consciousness? What is mind? What does it mean to the controller of the senses and the controller of thought and the observer of thought? If there's a neutral observer, if it's different than the controller, and all these type mechanisms that are very difficult according to physical explanations, but very conducive to what I would call dualistic explanations, but Jennifer's explanations. But I saw that like Jennifer even mentioned there was a communication failure and breakdown, and that might have been an opportunity where, not like a public psychoanalysis, like he was a good or bad person, but a thought process in that the atheistic thinking largely prevents TJump from self-observation, because the question that he failed to answer in the debate is like the who am I, who is the controller, is there even such a phenomenon of self-observation, and if there is such a thing as self-observation, who is doing it? And these like kind of axioms that if he had allowed you to like properly interrogate him and his belief systems, which he really didn't, he always flipped it right back on you. I think you could have demonstrated that his belief system limits his use of his own mind, and you could have even publicly demonstrated that.
Yeah, thanks for the feedback. And I just didn't want to have to go into that territory.
That was, that was
bad.
simply brilliant. Yeah, that was brilliant.
Thanks.
But I wonder if how much of this is a consequence of the ultimate limit of the Western, I'll use the word Western ego, isn't it? It seems, the more skeptical you get, the more egotistical you get, in so much that you believe that you have the sole arbiter of truth, that itself is detachable from you, right? This is a very uniquely, I think, post-Enlightenment idea, right? It's not been shared by other people with other tribes of deeper wisdom and time. It seems a uniquely post-Enlightenment idea that I can extract everything as my knowledge, have it written down, even though it's pointing to, I think you alluded to Gödel, even though you might point to its fundamental epistemological problems, you just got to brush those things and brush them off and keep on going, right? And I'm surprised that it seems like Tom is not conscious of the latest advances in science. We don't have predictive capabilities for complex systems. We don't even have the basic maths working right. So I don't understand why this ego tells you that you are free from anything other than your own mind. In a way, I find that quite remarkable myself personally. I mean, I don't know what your view on that is.
Well, are you familiar with the story of Ravana and Lord Ram?
I am, yes.
So you know that Ravana was a great scholar of Veda,
Yeah.
but he was still slain by God. You need a big ego to hold a lot of knowledge. But this is not knowledge what they hold. But it still requires a function of memory. So it still builds an ego, but it's not a strong and supple, flexible ego. It's a rigid ego that relies on rote memorization, and so it becomes quite brittle.
It's very mechanical, right? There's nothing. Again, the word holistic is considered a bad word, isn't it, by people on that side, right? Holistic is equated with hippie or something, right, or cannabis or something. They don't understand that holism is actually, one of the most powerful things we need to crack to be able to describe basic things in physics, maths. We just don't have it yet. But they somehow seem to hold on to their god of this idea of. So I don't know. I find it quite amusing.
Yeah, and what amazes me is that how Jennifer and David can abstract themselves to the point where their axioms no longer have meaning to those of us that have them. To propose that they have answers for humanity that somehow, are ungraspable. to those of us who live here on Earth.
No, we're proposing that we have explanations for consciousness largely based on tradition, not necessarily like our great discoveries, that is well known among the majority of humanity already through received traditions, and that these models are even more predictive in a scientific manner than the materialistic explanations that dominate the university. And I mean, to frame it, if you have to frame it in an unfriendly way, because the generally accepted axioms is that consciousness arises from the material. And, so you're sort of saying like, yeah, consciousness arises from someplace else. And if you're going to say that's like some other realm, so that, yes, when me and you are talking to each other, that event of me and you talking to each other is actually occurring in another realm. But that's classical philosophy. That's what all the major Western philosophers and believers of most forms of religion, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, have some sort of system where these events and interactions happen in the spiritual realm. So I mean, if you're an atheist, you reject that there is no spiritual realm. That's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. But it doesn't mean that we disagree on.
Yes, and what's bothersome to me is that the two of you seem to have some sort of insight that doesn't belong to anyone else.
I'm not sure if either one
We're
of
not
us
hoarding it. We're doing the show. You should be appreciative that we're sharing rather than resentful that it's too dense to penetrate on the surface, but we can mutually understand each other. Well, that's karma, I'm afraid.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not claiming to have any unique information that anybody else has.
I don't qualify because I don't fit into your target audience.
This is just absurd, false allegations. Like, if you can't get yourself together, I'm going to have to eject you because this is not conducive to a good conversation. You're just throwing allegations baselessly that we have to defend from. It's like, we get it.
Yes,
We don't want to have to.
we're not
We deny the axiom of you having the higher moral ground. We're not going to acknowledge it.
Okay, but the thing is that you find pleasure in not treating others as your equals.
Okay, Sigmund Freud.
Why do you believe people are not seeing others as equal?
It's just pure hallucination, right? It's like, you're now going to tell me how I feel. If I had contempt for you, I wouldn't be talking to you. If you don't like the fact that you have to accept axioms before you can begin to meaningfully accept teaching, take it up with the sages.
If anything, I believe Jennifer was very polite and calm. I think she had many an opportunity to, let's just say, lower the tone, but I don't believe he did he? So I'm not sure where that claim comes from. But hey, I'm the new guy on the block. So.
Oh, pay them no mind. People just get triggered, and then they hold on to things because of inertia. It's all very explainable by physics. It's a karmatic thing, and
no, it's called.
We can get past it.
You're laying down a path of dysfunction and then categorizing people.
I do not wish to take the conversation in that direction. Thank you.
You're such a dysfunctional path layer, you. Dysfunction. It's like people like to tell each other off, isn't it? It's remarkable. The internet does bring out the most of the telling everyone else off. I'm guilty of it myself. But
I can't get past it. Like, they could get past it, and I'm just like, you hurt my feelings forever. So it's like, let's just not even go there. But no, people really, they love to. I guess I look at it as play fighting, but it's like, this is too harsh for me. I can't play this game.
It is pure.
No,
I'm going to be right back. I'm making myself a cup of coffee because I deserve
Sure.
one. So I'll be right back.
Yeah,
Go
but
ahead,
that's indicative of the harsh human condition that we live in. That the reality is that intellectual conversations, people who could afford the liberty of being able to separate themselves from ideas, have the free time or resources to be able to research and really dive into these ideas, or even natural gifts or various things. And relatively, that's rare, and it's not necessarily valued by the masses. Intellectual, even knowledge of science, in terms like, yeah, can you produce some sort of technology? And even if you can, people really don't care. You might be able to patent it or make some money off of it, but your average person, even if they use it, doesn't really care that much about the mind that created it. So people with better minds, and even the natural inclination to be combative and violence, that say no, violence is the natural reaction of the subconscious, that you could always assume that that's what the person is thinking, because that's, person is a human animal, and it takes higher thought cognition to control the human animal. So there's like a dualistic system and explanation according to a spiritual understanding of a greater soul controlling the body, and how that functions in like the religious mind of a person who tries to say there's the natural animal inclination that causes me to want to act in a certain way, and then there's a larger power called the soul that controls my body and allows me to conduct my body in line, so to say, with God's law, with proper behavior, irregardless of the animal tendency of the body. And so it's a dualistic system, as opposed to like a TJump single system, where mind is purely a function of the body. And then you wouldn't have necessarily a fight between the soul and the body dragging in different directions as conceptualized by religion, but a mind would be a function of the body in a utility, and even like from a material perspective, that neural correlates cause higher level functioning that could create an illusion of thought or consciousness. That TJump really didn't address the issue of how does he view consciousness, and how do you filter knowledge of science, the problem of empiricism, that science is thought about in minds, and we don't know the nature of mind. So how certain can we be about science in the first place, which is really like still a basic philosophical question that it may have been difficult for Jennifer. That's why I'm constantly telling her it's best to learn proper terminology, and say things, get used to saying things in the lexicon that the majority of people in academy was saying. Most people aren't in the academy. Most people want to see blood. That just the masses, they want to see, like, let's just see the people get mad enough at each other that they start fighting, and then people are going to cheer on the side that they like more. That's like the basic of mob group think. There's never going to be the masses of people that are going to get together to think really hard on some sort of topic. And even if people are religious, the masses largely gather for ritual, gather for chanting. They don't gather for elite discourses, because their average mind doesn't have the concentration levels to even think about these things. And it's like TJump just dismissed this stuff as nonsense, and Jennifer is just some crazy woman that he humored, being nice to, and didn't even really take seriously her ideas at all. And if that, because this is his approach, because he's like, they're atheism, there just can't be any truth in this. He's not even going to bother taking what she's saying seriously, and just with ease he'll demonstrate that whatever she's saying is nonsensical anyways. And so if you're watching, you be the judge. Is that what TJump did, or is what Jennifer's saying is quite sensical? And then it's a question like the framing of answering questions, not in terms scientifically, but in the meaning of my life. How do you want to answer these questions? Is who I am arising simply from my brain and my body, or from an alternative source? And what type of worldview do you get based on those axioms? And so if you're going to take the axiom that mind arises from body, then that's going to have many likely implications and natural conclusions to that assumption, as opposed to saying mind arises from an alternative source. And so if you come from one school or the other, you could at least think according to the other process. Like Ben Watkins seemed quite capable of doing that, even though Ben Watkins is probably more in the school of TJump. He seemed quite capable of understanding the ideas from a dualistic understanding, and just saying what is the phenomenon that's being recognized, and separating yourself from the idea that there's a phenomenon that's being recognized by both of us, and we're interpreting this information in different ways of what this phenomenon means. And really it's chunking and pattern recognition of the limitness of how you understand it, of human perception and the human mind as it arises from the body, or the limitations that the soul takes by entering, so to say, the body. And then Jennifer, that actually has a quite complicated, not really complicated, not even necessarily complicated, but has interesting theories on physics.
The word is counterintuitive, because they're simple, but because they're simple, they're counterintuitive. Because we aren't really sympathetic to simple things, because we're so
well. So Duvid has alternative axioms that Jennifer's theories are not counterintuitive to me, even though we might come from different systems, and just she has understanding of an explanation of phenomenon, even though her understanding is quite different. Like I said, like me and Jennifer agree on what most people disagree about, and disagree about what most people don't understand. So if say TJump in reality is representative of the majority opinion of the West or modern society, which tends, God forbid, towards atheism, and that there is material explanation for basically all phenomenon, including that mind arises from body, so much so that it's a given. He speaks for science. He's the one who's right on that. Like you would have to do some serious work just to even like he, whatever reason that was how he was playing it. He thought that he had some sort of credibility that me or Jennifer are skeptical that he actually established on that. But to say that that like just a division, maybe it's half of humanity, or maybe it's divide different, that believe that phenomenon like this does not arise from the physical, and that mind and consciousness has an alternative explanation. So if you come from the school that yes, mind, consciousness, spiritual, even things like karma, like I prepped Jennifer on karma, just saying like morals and ethics. Does he believe that karma exists? And because like he basically spent the whole time interrogating Jennifer, and the few times where she tried to interrogate him, he was skilled debater, able to like almost instantly flip it on her, where he was the one interrogating her. But like the pressing of how does he derive these phenomenon that most people believe in, and say he just rejects them, like Ben Watkins saying like karma does not in fact exist, that it might be nice or pleasant to believe in karma, but actually the universe is indifferent to morals and ethics. And you should have pressed him on that, and then say like, no, I believe in science, and I believe in karma, and I believe in a systematic, synthetic, scientific explanation of these phenomena. And as opposed to if you pushed, Jennifer could have, like if it was structured in a formal debate, to actually getting TJump to publicly admit that he rejects these phenomena, that in fact he thinks they don't exist and they're nonsense. And even if you put it forward in the most scientific, logical way, he still rejects it as nonsense, because he's an atheist and thinks that all of these phenomena either don't exist or can be fully explained by material law.
I'd say it's a pretty good summary. It's sort of, that's why I keep coming back to this idea that it's like, this is not a tenable debate because he's not defending worldview, essentially. He's defending he's employing a rhetorical strategy, which is different from defending a worldview.
I think there's also something else, which is a good point over there, is that, to build on what David said, is like if you look at the Latin etymology of explain, which is explano, to lay out on a plane, to see all the parts and lose the whole, right? So I think a consequence of reductionism in classical science is that you keep using reductionism, breaking all these things into little parts, and then the Humpty Dumpty problem kicks in. You can't reassemble the whole, but they're holistic phenomenology that aren't amenable to top-down analysis, right? We already have evidence of this, plenty of it. I spent a large part of my career in investment banking, and we have a measurable phenomena in the stock markets that have no quantitative description, and they won't have a quantitative description until we crack certain maths, for example. But when you point these things out to them as things that we hold to be self-evident truths, the results of people like TJump, I'm not being personal against him, but the materialists, for lack of a better word, reject them out of hand because they can't see an explanation that is based out of division, right, of reductionism. So they can't admit into their kind of like proposition space, if you like, anything that can't immediately be amenable to reductionism. And you see this a lot. And every time you mention something, I think you use karma as an example, any other phenomenon, for them, it's like, I don't know what it's like. It's just like a poison, isn't it? They're so close-minded that they won't open their mind. Even if they were to open their mind and then later reject them using scientism, they still won't even do that. They won't take that first step, which again, to me, points to sort of like an ego problem, right? Or some other kind of psychoanalytical problem, much more than a honest intellectual pursuit, right? I'm not sure if you see it the same way. But I've debated lots of atheists and other people, and it's usually always comes down to something. If I can't explain it using reductionism, it doesn't exist. As opposed to why can't I explain it using reductionism, which would be a better, at least a more honest, materialistic approach. But
it's an ego thing. I don't think it's the only thing, but perhaps it's more tedious because they are making a claim to superior knowledge, aren't they?
That they are.
Whereas the religionists that they're normally debating against, I don't know that they're making that same claim. Not phrasing it the same way, anyway. So
yeah, I mean, TJump framed the basic argument that saying how do you decipher true from false ideas, and that his claim is that the scientific method has largely the way to do that, and that will be able to explain material phenomenon, I guess, and determine truth from falseness, and even that maybe like Ben Watkins that he holds, he could even drive morality and various things from those axioms, but he largely pressed you where you were your system of explaining how to drive truth from so Jennifer insisted that science could only tell you what's false, it can't tell you what's true, and I'm not sure he understood the argument, or he was kind of combative, or maybe he thought that was nonsensical, but there was a little back and forth where she directly hit his axiom or tenet, even though he couldn't agree to a definition of axiom. But whatever his claim that science was the method to determine true from false ideas, and what was his claim of when she said no, it only could falsify ideas, it can't verify, and then if it's to say it's prediction and percentage, that his argument about Jennifer's concept of taking a mentor and saying just accept axioms, and so you have to look to a superior and largely just start working with their axioms, and then through some sort of scientific process of trial and error, getting better axioms. But like obviously the first thing you have to do is choose a mentor and basically just work with their axioms, and then over a period of time you'll have a more objective view of what are good or bad axioms and what is the consequence of acting with certain axioms. But to start, you basically just have no choice other than to just find someone and largely copy their axioms, because you need a system to operate by. And then his like, well, sometimes can't you have bad mentors? And it's like, obviously you can have bad mentors, but like in a scientific way of a statistical method that you could largely have some predictive power of systems, like what's a good mentor, what's a good system, how do you go through the process of learning from flawed teacher in some sort of scientific way, as opposed to him saying like somehow I have aligned myself with science, and which is basically even if he's established, is that even conceivably possible that saying there is such a thing as science, and let's say more than Jennifer, that it could just falsify things, but if he claims it could even tell you truth, then that there's like some ability of this mind that arises from the physical that allows me to align myself with science. And so it's a pretty difficult thing for an atheist to establish, because basically you have to solve the hard problem of consciousness to give some sort of satisfactory explanation, and it's the hard problem of consciousness. There isn't really a satisfactory answer. So he could, in a good debate, he could have been honest with the axioms and admit it, but like he probably just wanted to show off his rhetorical skills. In that sense, he was able to just kind of like run circles around both James the host and Jennifer, and no matter what happened, he basically just flipped it around and started interrogating Jennifer, which was hopefully at least entertaining for the audience and a mental challenge for Jennifer, and good way to dive deeper into these ideas.
Thanks.
Do you think they'll only be satisfied when they have there's a, let's say, if there could ever be some sort of quantum quality geometry theorems that somehow they believe describe the hard problem of consciousness, that somehow they believe the answer has been found, right? I think even if we were to finally get quantum quality geometry sorted, and you have a bunch of theorems in them, I don't think that answers the problem of consciousness. I think it just gives the scientists a descriptor framework. Right, I'm not a physicist. I think Jennifer is, but I mean, I don't understand why that epistemology or the ontology generated by quantum quality geometry answers the consciousness question. I think it just ends up being a descriptor. Right?
You can set up the descriptive such that it's predictive. So I could say that the mind spontaneously creates a sense of self, and so it'll seek stimulus that is going to amplify its sense of self-image, and when it sees stimulus that goes against it strongly enough, it'll experience cognitive dissonance, which is very unpleasant, right? Like the shock of disappointment, cognitive dissonance, when someone does something you're familiar with.
But do you really think as human beings, let's say we had,
the model, I'm just getting to the final point, though. The predictive assertion would be that people seek to minimize cognitive dissonance.
But do you think that would actually help? Do you think that your average human being would say, okay, even if they had a ladybird or a sort of, what's the American version, a Cliff's Notes kind of guide to quantum geometry, that if they were to read such a book, that they would somehow feel that the true human condition and questions of consciousness have been answered? I don't think it would.
They would get to benefit. Well, you're familiar with Ayurveda, right? People get benefits from the medicine, even though they don't understand the doshas for shit. Right?
Okay.
They don't have to. The doctor understands them, and the doctor gives them the prescriptions, and they can get the benefits without understanding. And it's the same thing. It's just a question of how far into it do you want to go. Do you want to contemplate on the level of universal proto-consciousness or whatever, or do you want to just have something that helps you deal with your neuroses better, i.e. a method of identifying instances of cognitive dissonance, and then the exercise is you try to figure out what it was, because it's always a mismatched expectation. So the goal is to go back to the source of what was your expectation that was unrealistic, that led to the disappointment, and maybe have a different expectation next time.
Okay, so you think I'm not sure. I'm curious if I'm speculating here. I'm curious if the human condition, which I believe is fundamentally a metaphysical state, is going to be satiated by a description, even if it could deal with novel, hypotheses and predictability and everything else. I don't think that really. This is just me speculating. I don't think it would answer the question, right? I think it would just
It depends
open
what the
more
question.
questions.
It depends what the question is, and that is the method, because it's an infinitely complex system in a sense, and so you need to have a way to deal with the infinity, which is to remove one dimension of complexity at a time. So when you're done, you
Okay.
have one dimension of information, not done, but when you finish step one, you have one dimension of information, but you still have an infinitely complex system. It's just slightly more predictable. And then you work it down to like a finite number of these same judgments that then gets you to still not on the target, because there's no such thing as a particle, but you're within a range that could be considered acceptable. Like anywhere in that
So kind of
range, the outcome is
iterate
okay.
onto it, something. Yeah. I see. I have a different view. I believe that all these questions really are just tools and techniques to get us closer to the ultimate consciousness, or the ultimate, whatever your view is of theism or pantheism, or I believe David is Jewish. Whatever your view is to get closer to God, I believe these ultimately are some sort of Promethean things, right? I believe we are looking for answers, and these things are just going to be the tools beside the road as we keep progressing. I don't believe there's going to be a day we wake up and go, hey, here's my perfect 16 theorems of quantum quantum geometry, hard problem done, consciousness packed away, off we go with our life. I think it's going to get worse. Right? This is just my kind of view, but yeah, interesting. So.
But you haven't seen the quantum periodic table yet, so maybe your opinion.
No, I want to see your stuff, Jennifer. That's fine. Yeah, I'm not sure now's the right time, but all it is. So.
I've got the quantum periodic table up on the screen, but I'm not sure if you can see the actual video. So I also have it on the normal interface there, a double reflection of it.
Okay.
I've got David in the middle of it right now, so I can put him off in the middle. But yeah, it's what did you call it? Holistic. It's the holistic periodic table.
And what is it meant to represent? Is it represent the periodic table expressed in wave functions, or what do you?
Yep.
Okay.
But you're the first one to get that. Nice.
Okay. Yeah. No, because I think
it's 5 years and no one's given me that response. So good job.
Hey, something drew me here. Maybe it was our spirit animals. let me taunt the atheists in the chat and use terms like spirit animal. No, but I have a question for David. Actually, I'm being presumptuous, assuming you're Jewish, David. Of course, so correct me if I'm wrong. What does Tanakh say about like neo-Dharmic kind of worldviews? Is there? I'm guessing Jennifer's techno neo-Dharmist in some sense, but. Is there guidance on this from the Abrahamic traditions?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the Kabbalistic systems are largely karmatic explanations, interplay between the spiritual and physical realm. That's based on an assumption that the Jewish text, the revelation rituals are true, but to some extent could be taken as independent systematic explanations of the interplay of the spiritual and physical realms, like the spirit and world systems. And the scholars will debate the true origins if it comes from the Greeks, but most Jews believe that it's a derivative of the Hebrew prophets and kind of like a hidden wisdom. And if you're a believer, that's the system that God used to create the world. And as monotheists, there's a lot of similarities between Vedic and Kabbalistic systems in a lot of ways, and then just as believers, as so to say, dualists, that in an atheistic world, even if people have a different understanding of karma, at least they believe in karma as a spiritual realm and some sort of accounting for karma, but have different systems of karma or different explanations. And even as like a comparative systematic theology, I like doing interfaith and I'm a half Jew. I have some Native American blood, Scottish blood, but I studied in Orthodox schools and had trained to be a rabbi. But in practice, I love doing Jewish rituals and promoting Judaism, but not in an official capacity of a rabbi. But I love doing interfaith and like thinking about comparative theological spiritual systems, and even objectively from a metaphysics where you're saying, is there some sort of revelation that God had done in history, and different groups of religion have these received wisdom traditions versus just a systematic scientific approach to spirituality. If you're taking as an axiom karma is real, and karma is real because it's a phenomenon that's carried out in what we'll call the spiritual realm. And then if you take that as an axiom, you could develop infinite, probably systems that explain how that phenomenon exists, and trying to reduce, different received traditions like Judaism, Hinduism, paganism, any tradition into axioms like that, and then analyzing it as a predictive system of karma. That's saying karma is a phenomenon. There is some sort of action reaction that good people get rewarded and bad people get punished in a way that atheists would reject and say, no, the universe is indifferent to ethical, moral reward and punishment. But there could be a predictive system where you could create axioms that there is an action reaction, and the material realm can't account for the fact that there's karma, and karma could, so to say, be tested because phenomenon happen and exist and could be measured.
Oh, interesting, right? So it would equate to something like the accrual of sin, or some metaphysical, depending on your tradition, right? Because I like when Jennifer mentioned, when she did mention in the debate about the idea of having multiple ontologies or multiple ontologies of faith to approach this, and I think that's quite critical, right? Because we have such a split in the fundamental ontologies between the Abrahamic faiths and the Dharmic ones. So I think the idea, as someone who's, like I say, I was going to be a maths physics kind of kid, but I got bit by computer science at a very young age. And, we know this from foundations in computing, from foundations in maths, that a single ontology, a single set of axioms is going nowhere. Right? There will never be an uber set of axioms, right? So the idea then becomes, if we have multiple modes of inquiry, then it sort of makes sense that those can be used to at least ratify each other or cross-correlate each other, what have you, however what you put it together, as opposed to the single, hegemonistic atheistic scientific view, right? That assumes everything is always going to be describable or predictable by science, right? Which, I mean, I don't know, for me, I guess it's almost like, maybe I'm being a bit silly here. It's early in the morning in Berlin. I'm about to head out for a walk, but it just seems to be more less plausible to take the materialistic point of view. I mean, the more we understand about science, the more we know what we don't know, right? It seems that the dogmatism almost seems flipped, right? It seems like the ultra skeptics are the true dogmatists, right? They literally will not get off the scientific method, right? Despite the fact that they throw out their ontologies, they don't really seem like true skeptics. I don't know if that's your view. I found like Jennifer, I found Tom was ultimately dogmatic in that debate, or call it a discussion. He just wasn't budging. He wasn't opening his mind. He wasn't entertaining Jennifer's viewpoints. He was being very
It wasn't
tactical.
properly framed at all. The thing, like it was written. It was supposed to be pantheism versus atheism debate, and then it basically became an interrogation of TJump to Jennifer on various issuing, and maybe even at some point, God forbid, like a badgering. But if it was properly framed as an atheistic versus pantheistic debate, where he set up a system of atheism, and then she attacked his system of atheism as being inconsistent, in any debate style, but he didn't even go to the trouble of laying out his system of atheism. He basically turned down his ability to give his introduction and just went straight to questioning her, and his question was kind of just like, what did you say? It didn't make any sense, God forbid. But But I mean, so if you're saying objectively, versus the understanding of the concept of atheism, and saying professionally, we know, like, if we were doctors or engineers, and if Tom's licensed, and you assume like he could do his dharma as an engineer, even as an atheist, that he might have expertise or proficiency that could be demonstrated in the axioms of his belief system, that that mind arises from the physical, or that karma as a phenomenon doesn't actually exist, that it doesn't necessarily mean that that he wouldn't be proficient or professional enough to carry out dharma with those axioms. And you say, like, in our version of what's a better functioning society, you might say that might lead to bad character or a certain type of personality defects that are cause harm unnecessarily, and would be better if they were refined, and having those axioms is more likely to lead to unrefined character. But even largely just recognizing that and being able to function together, as opposed to like objectively proving the objective, to say that if you were up against somehow the objective best arguments of atheism, and you're saying I would still win, even if I was not debating just a person who's a really good debater, but I was debating the objective best arguments in favor of atheism.
Yeah, I think that's the only time I've seen Tom actually uncomfortable is when it's been a unipolar inquiry, right? I've seen a couple of, I can't remember the names of philosophers, really drill into the bedrock of his axiomatic beliefs in science. And that's where he's been least comfortable and most polite, which is quite interesting. So, right, as opposed to a sort of a dogfight, which is what the more was. But I'm going to have to dash off now for my sort of morning walk. But thanks ever so much for having me on, Jennifer. It's been a pleasure to meet you, David.
Great to meet you. Hopefully we can chat again soon. And
yeah, I'll drop my email in there somewhere. I put it in the side chat in this thing as well, if you like. And it'd be nice to talk to David as well. So,
thanks for coming on. Yeah, we do week in review basically every Sunday night.
Okay, brilliant. I'll pop on next time. I'll put my email in the back chat, and have a wonderful day, chaps. God bless them. Take care.
that was a nice change, or a nice change of pace, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm saying, like, if you could keep on doing week in review, but if you want to have a regular show, you basically have to like have callers, like caller your live, and have it structured in a way where basically anyone could get on and say something, and like I said, like TJump's a master rhetorician and basically controlled the conversation the whole time, even though I don't think he made better points. I think you made better points, but because of his rhetorical skill, he was basically able to control the conversation. So in terms of like controlling your own stream, like, yeah, for you to have, you basically have to be like caller you're on, and be able to handle it no matter what happens. Just like you're running a store, the store is only going to be successful if people from the street come in and buy things. So you need people coming in from the street, and that means you have to be able to handle whoever might come in off the stream. So that's a skill that is separate to from being an intellectual or understanding, just like running a business or controlling these things. And it's actually something that it's actually pretty difficult, like doing security or just like opening up a business, and just being able to deal with things. Or if you run a business or a store, like God forbid, maybe a few times a year there's fights or stealing, and you have to call the police. And if you're a big rabbi or spiritual figure, and the worst things in town come across your desk, so to say, you might have to deal with these things like all day, every day even. But so I'm saying eventually, hopefully relatively quickly, Jennifer will gain these skills, and it's women like people like Charles Moskowitz, Luke Ford, Kevin Michael Grace. They're really radio professionals. So I'm saying, like Jennifer is a smart woman, but to be like a radio professional, to man her own channel like a radio professional's not that easy of a thing to do, but she might get there, and that's why I was happy to help out. So people on hopefully they'll sub, and Jennifer has really neat ideas and theories, and then also just conversation. She enjoys more question and answer, and people who really want to try to understand her ideas, but then sometimes also conversations and just debate. Like both of us enjoy debate as a good method to teach and understand. So I think Jennifer did good. I think like I said, like give TJump the rope to hang himself. That largely the reason it wasn't better was because of his lack of performance, not hers. Although obviously she could have performed better in countless ways. But I think relatively, I think she outperformed TJump. But like he's obviously a skilled rhetorician and was able to put on a show, and even his interrogation of her was probably good for her, good for the audience, and so we could go over that flow more. Hopefully Jennifer will flow the performance herself, like saying that as someone who wants to improve and debate, even if you were on the highest levels, that is the process you should avow yourself to. You should flow your own debate, and from any serious level, you can't really improve your debate performance without at least attempting to flow your own debate. So hopefully Jennifer will do that. If she does, I'm happy to go over that with her. Probably just week in review, but if applicable, we could make a new stream. So I guess if Jennifer has anything left to say to me, otherwise it's about 1 a.m. where I am. And if you want to keep on going, or there's more people who want to talk, I encourage Jennifer to try to grow her channel, hit the 1,000 subs. And neither one of us are trying to make money, or it's more about the ideas, and repair the world, make the world a better place through the propagation of good ideas. But if Jennifer could hit 1,000 subs and get monetized, people operate in the material realm, and hopefully new people will come to Jennifer's channel, and hopefully she'll be able to make more direct like physics girl, math girl. So that why is Doofit always here? Because I'm more it's just my style of what I'm better at, and I think Jennifer moving to the future might be better producing even just explanatory videos on some of these ideas. But she does best in a question answer, kind of like disciple teacher type back and forth, and so she would need people who actually take what she says seriously, and like read the blog and think about these ideas. But the debates are very important, because then people could conceptualize what are the axioms, what's so fundamentally different about the way TJump sees the world and the way Jennifer sees the world, that they could understand the axioms of her system. And then relatively the ideas are not actually that complicated. What's complicated is that
Emotions?
well, maybe not even the emotion. I mean, saying that emotions could get in the way of a person who hasn't trained their mind to separate their thought as best as possible from the emotion, but just to conceptualize that it's a system that has different axioms, and that if they're trying to look at it through a material or a certain framework of axioms that might even be common in the places where they've taught, that it'll lead them to a failure to be able to understand the ideas, or at least see them for like relatively simple, straightforward from the frame that she's putting forward from.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Sorry for chuckling. I just remembering something. Yeah, thanks for coming on, and really appreciate all your insights. We'll talk to you Sunday, if not sooner, when David and I have our regular weekly show, Week in Review, to discuss whatever the heck we want. But David usually keeps things respectable and on topic. So really
yeah, I
enjoy
encourage you
that.
to monologue if you want, because it's a good skill to develop. And if you want to hit 1,000 subs and have an audience, you got to be able to speak directly to your peeps without co-host. And like people want to hear you, your followers, your peeps want to hear directly from you without an intermediary. So great work, and see you week in review, and maybe sooner.
Cool. Hey guys, I put the link in the chat one last time if anyone had any last questions, but I do need to wrap this up relatively soon due to having things that I have to do before a certain time. So thanks to the audience and to the new viewers. Thanks for being open to checking out. Oh, they may be talking shit about Jenny. Guys, people talking shit about me on the internet is kind of like 2016 called, I might have cared. But yeah, enjoy the shit streams wherever they may be. And I have a couple things I gotta go clean up. Sorry I'm such a shit monologuer. I'm just sort of a purpose-driven person, and I can't really often see the purpose to monologuing because I always have to check if people are actually listening to what I'm saying. I lose interest if a person's not listening. And yeah, precious focus. Thanks everyone for your support and for hopefully subbing to the channel to get me to my 1,000 subs on my hopefully not too long of a march towards legitimacy and towards everybody embracing a deeper understanding of how the universe really works. Thanks, Lope. Thanks, everyone in the chat. Appreciate the support. We will see you next time.
That's just so to say, a worthless opinion of.
It's so important that she can't be told, she won't be told that it's wrong. And
bringing it back to Church of Entropy and her attack dog Gandalf the White.
Why don't you learn to shut up and fuck goddamn logic?
they control the media, and the media is capable of making the sheeple believe in anything.
Yeah, I don't mind. I mean, we've had these streams, and I've been doing with Church of Entropy, and she's been bringing on new people, and like we did those streams on like stream etiquette. We walked through like the technology.
I have like very strongly negative opinions of the kind of Brundle clique.
Is she trying to garner herself